Hey gang, welcome. My name is Dan Stoll. I'm one of the professors here at the University of Washington's Master of Supply Chain Transportation and Logistics program. I'm also a member of our board of advisors, and I want to introduce you today to Elise Grow to continue on our series of AI and the modern supply chain. One of the interesting things about our faculty is we tend to be, people that are working professionals that are a little bit later in our career. And we talk about this as a faculty all the time, just what an absolute privilege it is to get to work with some of the students that come through because you get a set of people every single year who are just absolute all-stars. They build great relationships with their cohort, they build great relationships with the professors, they do some reaching out to our members of the board of advisors, and it's just an absolute pleasure to work with these people. And Elise is definitely one of those. She just graduated this past year, and in a conversation with her, she was late to a meeting and said, "Sorry, I was in some training where we're going over Copilot. Well, tell me a little bit about it." And it's like, "Hey, Elise, we should think about doing a webinar because I think you've got some really interesting things that you're doing there." So we've spent the last couple of months putting this together. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Elise. Maybe, Elise, you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump into some of the use cases that you've come up with. Let me stop my share here.
Okay, great. I'll start my share. Can you see my screen? It should be the full page slide deck.
There it is.
Excellent. Okay, get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. What we'd like to talk about today is something I think many of us are feeling in our work right now. We're going to walk through kind of what AI can look like in a supply chain environment, some real use cases from my role, and some practical wins and places where our human judgment is still absolutely crucial. I'll be sharing some examples from my own experience and provide some insight, food for thought, as the workplace we know is rapidly changing. By the end of this, I hope you walk away with a clearer sense of how AI can fit into your world and business, not necessarily as a replacement for expertise, but as a tool and working with it as a skill set of its own. So first, I'll jump in a little bit about me. I currently work at Microsoft in reverse supply chain, and prior to that, worked at PACCAR in the aftermarket parts division and inventory planning. And bridging these two branches of experience was my time at UW in the MSCTL program, which I know Dan will share a little bit more about later. I completed the program in 2 years while working full time. And while that was challenging, it was incredibly valuable and integral to advancing my industry knowledge and growing my network. I'm also a double Husky, having earned my BA in business as well from UW. So yeah, thanks again, Dan, for having me on, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. All right, before we get into the fun stuff, I do need to run through a couple of quick disclaimers. We'll be talking a little bit about this idea of the frontier firm framework, just an industry concept, helpful way to frame where organizations are headed, not a competitive claim. You'll hear me also mention some Microsoft tools and internal workflows. These examples are simply meant to illustrate what's possible with the technology. They're not endorsements, partnerships, or official statements. And everything I'm sharing today reflects my experience working with these tools in supply chain environments, not necessarily a formal strategy of Microsoft. And with that out of the way, I'll jump right in. So the first section here is really about the shift we're seeing across the industry, the differences between organizations that are simply experimenting or dabbling with AI and those that are actually transforming because of it. So we'll talk about what it looks like to actually experiment and then to move to truly operating with the AI. So here are some of the elements that separate a traditional enterprise from what we call a frontier firm. Traditional organizations tend to treat AI as something you add on top of existing processes, kind of like a tool you plug in when you have the time or when a specific problem pops up. Frontier firms take a different approach. They build AI into the core of how decisions get made and how work flows across the organization. A few things shift when this happens. So firstly, AI integration. Instead of being kind of an optional add-on, it becomes embedded in day-to-day operations. We're definitely seeing this across many different industries to help generate new efficiencies. Next, decision making moves from being fully human driven to human led and agent assisted. People still lead, but they're supported by faster insights and better context. Data strategy. Data stops living in fragmented systems that we have access to one by one and become unified, governed, and context aware systems, which is really what makes AI actually useful in the workplace. Next, workforce model. Employees are not just executing tasks, they're actually collaborating, so to speak, with AI to move faster and focus the human resources on higher value work. And then for innovation approach, instead of a slow incremental improvement, you get continuous experimentation and scaling. Big takeaway here being that a frontier firm isn't about having the most advanced technology, it's about being intentional, building the right data foundations, empowering people, and creating an environment where using AI can actually make a difference. I'll go ahead and pause here. Dan, do you have any additional thoughts on this topic?
No, I mean I love the model, and I can definitely see, from the people that I've talked to and the organizations that I've been dabbling with, that's really more of kind of an add-on sort of environment rather than an integration. And I love the concept of kind of continuous experimentation, because I think if that sort of mindset in any company helps you make incremental improvements. I think if you wait around with we've got one board member who's the CEO of a big AI and analytics firm, and typically when they get the call, it's because a CEO has told his vice president crew, go out and we have to do something with AI, right? And just kind of this broad brushstroke. They're looking for something that's miraculous, come in, do an installation and leave, and all of a sudden we're AI enabled. And I just don't think that that's a successful model. And I think that his experience bears that out. So I love the model, and excited to see how you've used it in your day-to-day operations.
Thanks. So next we'll be going over something that isn't necessarily the most fun part about AI, but it is the key determinant to whether AI actually works in organizations, which is data readiness and change management. These two elements are really kind of making up the foundation of what make everything else possible in terms of AI usage. When we talk about becoming a frontier firm, this is where the real work begins. AI can only be as effective as the environment you put it into, and that starts with strong data foundations and intentional change management. So walking through some of these key elements here, we have data hygiene. This is unfortunately a very unglamorous part of our processes, right? But it's essential. Clean, consistent data is what allows AI to produce reliable outputs. Standardizing formats, internal jargon, removing duplicates, and also enforcing governance and compliance is not necessarily exciting, but it really impacts the quality of every AI-driven insight. You might have heard the phrase like trash in, trash out, or garbage in, garbage out. It's the same idea. So governance. As AI becomes more embedded into operations, these guardrails really matter, especially if you have sensitive data or working with highly secure systems. Governance ensures that data is secure, that we're meeting regulatory requirements, and that agent activity is monitored appropriately, creating a safe control environment where AI can operate responsibly. Next is change management. This is where a lot of organizations may underestimate the lift. Incorporating AI rapidly changes workflows, roles, and expectations of teams. So people need a lot of clarity, training, transparency to feel confident adopting AI tools. Without that, organizations may struggle to actually reap the benefits of AI. And lastly, employee empowerment. Ultimately, AI is most effective when people feel equipped to use it in a way that really impacts business and drives new efficiencies. So this means providing the right tools, resources, and ongoing support. The big takeaway here is that AI success isn't just about the technology, it's about all these environments that you build around it. And when data is strong and people are supported, AI can become a real multiplier in the industry instead of a disruption. I'll take a pause here, Dan. I know you and I have talked a little bit about this as well and how workplaces can really integrate more AI.
Yeah, it's interesting you open up with the quote unquote unsexy part talking about data hygiene, right? And we did the very first webinar we did in the series featured the CEO I told you about, Fabio, and Bill, one of our other professors. And Bill's a longtime consultant in the supply chain IT space. And he said probably 95% of the projects that he's been involved with in his career begin with data, right? They come in and they say, hey, Bill, we've got this business problem. We've got this European unit that really isn't functioning properly, and we think the inventory's out of whack. He does not even a deep dive and quickly realizes that the data is a mess. And Fabio said the same thing, right? The first thing that he will typically do as they're onboarding a client is just say, just send me a snapshot of your data. Just give me a sample. Let us go through it. And that gives them a good sense of how much scrubbing they're going to have to do of their data. So I think that's a very interesting catch. And I think the whole idea of change management, like you said, people don't understand the lift. You got to understand the process flows and getting the right people in the right seats and the processes all lined up. And I think you're right on track there. And it sounds mundane, but very important.
Yep, definitely. Next, I'll be kind of going through a few use cases from my work, a little bit of AI in action, some takeaways I've had. Starting off with an example of using AI to help me onboard a new hire. A little while ago, I was onboarding a college hire, and like most early in career hires, they came in with a mix of strengths and some gaps in understanding. My goal was to help them ramp quickly, so I wanted to understand the areas of our training plan that they were likely to need the most review on and where they and I could focus our efforts. I plugged their job experience and degree program into Copilot and asked in my prompt, based on this employee's background, what areas of supply chain training will they need the most support in to be successful as supply planner or in their role? Within seconds, really, it created a full breakdown, areas where their academic experience aligned well, places they would likely need more hands-on guidance, and even specific topics that tend to be challenging for new grads stepping into our space. And then from there, I had Copilot pull together the relevant SOPs, team resources, and training materials tied to those areas. And the result was an onboarding plan that was tailored, efficient, and it was genuinely supportive. It saved me probably a lot of hours in kind of mulling this over, and it gave the new hire a much clearer path from day one. Adding to these resources, of course, was still a lot of time spent one-on-one with the new hire to pass off any tribal knowledge that doesn't necessarily live in our system. But using Copilot created a real training plan and concrete steps forward so that this new hire could self-train when I or another trainer was not available. And as AI technology matures, I think we can anticipate a not so distant future in which onboarding, which is something managers typically assign to other direct reports, is now outsourced to an agent that can really measure.
Elise, if I can just jump in, we just had an in-person event last night. I was foreshadowing your presentation, talking about onboarding and the process you went through. And the group was you and I, and then a retired lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. He had like 2,000 people in his organization. Another person was in the supply chain in med tech, and another was an Amazon person. And to a person, they all just chuckled and said, "I don't think I've known anybody who's had a satisfying onboarding experience." So it was a very, very timely topic.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things that we always have to do, but perhaps, with AI, we can think of a better way to do it in the future. So next, I'll go into a little bit of self-onboarding. When Dan and I were kind of speaking about my experience at work, I explained to him sort of how I got acquainted with a recent role change that I had. Anytime I move on to a new program or I'm starting to support a new product line that I've never touched before, there's always a moment of, okay, where do I even start? Normally that means maybe digging through old PowerPoint decks, old SharePoint folders, any documentation that lives in the system, and kind of reading over what I need to know. It also includes talking to a lot of people that donate their time to me and um, are willing and able to kind of pass on their tribal knowledge and expertise. I recently gave Copilot a list of a lot of historical products that I am now kind of in charge of on my side of the business, kind of internal code names that don't necessarily have an external resource. I couldn't exactly Google them, so to speak. I asked Copilot to pull together everything it could find, along with, when did the product launch and what was the product exactly? What are some of the key specifications of it? And it generated a detailed overview of launches, relaunches, context that I could have spent hours hunting for in the right documents. Instead of searching around in all of these different data sources manually, I spent more of my time actually just absorbing this information and, of course, validating it across any other resources I could find. I was able to show up to a lot of conversations that I hadn't been able to with some real context behind the history of these products and not just a list of questions like, when did this product launch and what's the story behind it? A lot of times the people who launch these products have moved on to something else. Who knows? So using Copilot didn't replace kind of the requirement of me doing deeper learning, but it absolutely accelerated my trajectory and be able to manage the life cycles of these products more effectively. And that was really where I found the value in it. It removed the friction so I could focus on the work that actually required my judgment and experience rather than just searching through files for hours and hours. I know, Dan, we've talked about this a little bit. I know you had a couple insights on
Yeah.
some of the
Yeah,
how
sorry,
data
I
flows
paused there,
through.
but yeah, no. So I just this week started doing some research on this whole area of enterprise data retrieval, which is kind of a fancy term for people spend a lot of time hunting and pecking through their enterprise systems trying to find the one thing that they need. There was one guy at the event last night, Luke. He works for a consulting firm. They do a lot of due diligence on the sale and acquisition of ports. And so they do a lot of proposals, they do a lot of analyses, they issue a lot of reports. He said, "You can't believe how much time we spend going through our file structures, going, didn't we do a proposal on this? And didn't we do an analysis on the port of Charleston to analyze dwell time or whatever it was? Where is that thing?" They spend a ton of time. And that's where I think this whole saving you time, as you put it, accelerating your trajectory of being able to find and retrieve that information and then put it into a format that's actionable is a huge, doesn't matter if you're in the supply chain, doesn't matter what you do in your organization, it's a huge problem across the enterprise.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of disparate data sources, a lot of information floating around in emails. So this was incredibly helpful. And then kind of the last use case I'll go through is warranty terms lookup. So one of the challenges in supply chain, especially reverse logistics, is dealing with older products where the documentation isn't always clean or centralized. Warranty terms are a perfect example. Different regions, different revisions, different policy updates. And a lot of the time, the information you may need is buried in a folder that no one has really touched in years. I had a situation recently where I needed to confirm warranty terms for a legacy SKU. So I prompted Copilot to search all the historical policies, support docs, and regional terms tied to that product. And it pulled everything together in seconds, highlighted the relevant sections that I needed to reference, including differences by market and revision. So my role in this case was simply to validate the applicability and make sure that the actual context matched the specific scenario. But the time savings in having to search for all of this manually were huge. And more importantly, the answer was grounded in actual documents, which I prompted Copilot to cite exactly, and not just assumptions or tribal knowledge in this case. So that was kind of the last use case that I had. Dan, anything to add
Yeah.
there?
I mean, that use case really resonates because in my class, I ask require half of the grade is you've got to find a business problem at work. You got to kind of measure it. What's the impact? How much is this really costing us? Develop a list of proposed solutions and then try to figure out if we invest the time and money to solve this particular problem, how are we going to get our money back? And in the supply chain, we have a lot of procurement people, which is, in contract management and legal. And this whole idea of crawling through older contracts or contract documentation and pulling out what exactly did we say about, the mutual liability or what was our service level on this contract. And again, it goes back to that process that I call the sort of hunt and peck. You got to find the contract. Some of these contracts are 60, 80, 100 pages long. You got to find the exact provision. If you can just simply ask Copilot to go and retrieve that information and let you take a look at it. Now, we're probably still in the phase, not just Copilot, everybody, all the different LLMs where you need to go in and verify. Like, okay, I just need to crack open that contract real fast and verify, yeah, that wording is actually on page 69, sort of thing. So, yeah, I think this is another one of those broad, applicable use cases for any one of the LLMs.
Yep, definitely. Um, some additional food for thought here, some other uses that I found very helpful with Copilot. One example is in meeting support. If we join late, get pulled away, or having to juggle multiple conversations or work streams, uh, Copilot can recap what you missed and pull out the action items and actually assign owners to each of the action items that were mentioned in the meeting, which is really great for alignment. Um, and then if you join a meeting late, you don't have to rehash the last 10 minutes that you missed. You can just prompt, what did I miss in the last 10 minutes? And then it'll actually do it for you during the call. Another area is using Copilot as somewhat of a moderator function in cross-functional meetings, especially the ones with a lot of voices and competing priorities. The AI can actually surface the core issue or highlight some key understandings that we all agree on, um, which is really great because I think we've all been in meetings where it seems like we're not really getting anywhere. So I've used Copilot on a few occasions to prompt, what is the crux of the issue that we're discussing? And it actually pulls out some really great insights. Then there's research and drafting. So whether I'm comparing options, structuring presentation, pulling together a recommendation, Copilot can definitely help to get to a first draft or take a first draft and refine it. There are many times when I'm actually in a meeting, we have a lot on the agenda, and Copilot can generate like a quick 2-minute elevator pitch of what I was going to say for 10 minutes when I only have 2 minutes left. And I just need to get kind of the executive level takeaways out so that we can move forward with our decisions. And then finally, automation for repeatable workflows, things like approvals, reminders, recurring tasks. Copilot can help orchestrate steps so you're not manually pushing process along. I think that is still kind of an area of development, at least in my workflows, that I'm sort of looking forward to as we continue to grow in our AI usage.
I forget where we're at in the deck, but we've had some really interesting questions. Do you have more? Should we take some questions now, or what do you want to do, Elise?
Last section is the warnings and guardrails, so we're almost
Nice.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, cool. Um, so lastly, just want to spend a moment on something that's just as important as AI, which is some guardrails here. As helpful as AI can be, it's not something that we can just trust blindly. There are a few areas where we need to stay intentional. I'm sure a lot of you have maybe tried to generate some graphics using AI. They can generate charts or diagrams quickly, but it doesn't always get proportions, colors, annotations. I've actually tried to generate some images with text involved, and the AI has a lot of trouble editing the text that, maybe there's a spelling error, just has trouble doing that at the moment. Next is obviously factual accuracy. AI is great at pulling information together, but it can also be confidently wrong, unfortunately, in a lot of scenarios. So making sure that we're continuing to cross-check our facts, figures, and citations. A great practice is to prompt cite your sources, cite the link where you got this information and which page or paragraph. Think about it as like a researcher, but maybe not a final authority. Next, context and overgeneralization. AI doesn't always capture nuance. It may give you an answer that's maybe technically correct, but not appropriate for your situation. So you need to really put your thinking cap back on and make sure that we have a little bit of that nuance that is really like the human touch in all of this. Next, data hygiene dependency, and governance. AI is only as good as the data behind it. If the data is outdated, inconsistent, which can happen a lot in organizations, or poorly governed, the outputs will reflect that. Strong data practices and clear guardrails on who has access to what information and when we're applying models into that is definitely a non-negotiable. We also need to keep human in the loop. AI can help accelerate work, but humans still need to approve, escalate, and handle exceptions. So that's where our judgment, experience, and context that we can bring comes in. And then finally, privacy and compliance, avoiding, personal identifiable information, following regulations, company policies, all of that obviously very crucial. The goal with these guardrails, it's not really to slow down innovation. It's actually more of an enablement to make sure that we're using AI in the best way possible, and in also a responsible way, as it becomes more embedded in our workflows.
Just to add a little bit to that, I wrote a paper with a professor from China about governance of AI. And the basic idea was if AI is going to manage people, we need to manage AI. It was just kind of, maybe that's a little bit too much, AI managing people. But the basic idea was, you use these tools, you're probably you're accessing a lot of data, even though it comes back summarized. So I think being sensitive to the organization and to their own risk profile, it's like, what is this data? Where does it come from? When you have this data that then you are pulling in and you summarize, you're creating your own data. Who owns that? Where does it go? Where does it live? Just like I'm sure you did when you did this deck, you sent it off to Microsoft Legal and they gave you the cautions, right? The disclaimers. Same way with operating with data. Every now and then, I think maybe checking in with the senior executives and the legal people and just saying, how confident are you? Here's what I think we're accessing, and here's the data that I think we're generating. What do you think about this? Should I be talking to somebody on that? So being a little risk averse, I think, is a good idea. And by the way, I love the fact that you highlighted making sure that you're getting citations like the report name or the web page number and the page number, the paragraph, getting all that information so you can double check. That is absolutely crucial because we're still in the very early days here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that wraps up the prepared content I have for today. We can turn over to discussion and Q&A.
Okay, so let me just read a couple. So from Luke, for any of your use cases, have you been able to set up recurring tasks that the agent performs? For example, on the warranty term lookup, did you set up any type of automation that triggers the agent to start the process as opposed to entering the prompt as the need arises?
Yeah, great question, Luke. For that specific use case, I have access to some just tools in Copilot, but not really there yet on using like a truly agentic workflow to kind of recur that single task. I think that's somewhere where we'd like to be in the future, but for now, just using prompting on the spot.
Yeah. So let me give you an interesting example. So I wrote a couple of AI assistants. One does analyzes an organization's brand positioning, and I did it to look at this one organization and all their competitors in this marketplace, right? So then I come up with, and each one of these reports is about 2,500 pages long, and I programmed this thing to analyze 10 different elements of an organization's brand positioning. Then I wrote a separate AI that analyzes the strategic marketplace. So it looks at the 10 competitors in this marketplace and it parses and segments and comes up with, okay, here's what's happening in the market. Here's where the top three firms, where they kind of position themselves. The next three, it breaks up the market like that. In the future, what you'd like to be able to do in a pure agentic environment is ask it to go, here's the list of competitors, go out, generate the report, and then take the results of these 10 different reports, send it over to the strategy AI, and have the strategy AI automatically kick out a report that I can look at and understand it. Unfortunately, we're just not there. There's still kind of this manual handoff process. So if you watch, there's certain people on YouTube where they just say, agents are here. And I think if you're a really super technical programmer, you can probably get it to work. And there's some new tools that are coming out, but I don't think we're there quite yet. So thanks for the question, Luke. Mark writes, hi, Elise. Any feedback from the new onboards on how well AI identified what they need to focus on versus what is already known?
The main feedback from the new onboards was, wow, I really should be using Copilot more, honestly. Um, I think that's probably a big shift from where they might have been in the university education and maybe where their specific school was in terms of adopting AI and promoting its usage in like an educational environment or in a previous workplace. So I think that was maybe the biggest takeaway from that. I'd be very curious to see when we get a new onboard at some point to kind of try it again and see if there are some repeatable workflows that we can in the future identify. Um, I'm on a team right now where we have a little bit less specificity in a lot of our core activities. I think it would work really well in something where tasks are highly repeatable and you can really train and maybe already have really robust documentation. That's something that on my team, I think we're lacking a little bit of to be able to fully create like a onboarding plan.
Yeah, nice. Great question, Mark. Thank you. From Kathy, is your team also tracking use cases that don't turn out as expected to see where the outliers are and adapt prompt engineering processes? Thanks.
That's a great question. Um, so as far as I know, at least on my close team, we're not really tracking use cases that don't work. We're kind of starting a bit of a culture of like sharing what has worked. In terms of what hasn't worked is honestly the program lookup, like the self-onboarding use case example I shared. I actually attempted it about 10 times over the course of a week before it actually worked, which was kind of interesting. I don't think it was anything to do with maybe the prompt. It was just kind of like system capacity or just the AI just didn't quite function properly at the time when I was putting the prompt in. Um, the other thing that we found is, using AI to create prompts. So if you're getting into anything like the vibe coding thing where you put a prompt in and say, hey, I need a query for this type of solution that you're trying to pull data out of, and it can actually create, oh, here's actually a prompt that you should put um, into like a coding software to be able to come up with like a query for you. So you can actually use AI to help prompt AI, which
Yeah.
would be an interesting experiment for you to try.
Yeah, I mean that's anytime I'm building an AI assistant, I always use another AI to help me craft the prompt, the custom instructions. That's a great question, Kathy. I had one a couple of weeks ago. I was getting ready for the webinar we did a week ago Saturday, and I just asked, I think it was ChatGPT, hey, give me three different interesting supply chain scenarios I might demonstrate how to build an AI assistant. And one of them was something related to dwell time, I think. And so I said, okay. So I built the whole thing. I run it. I then ask it, okay, can you compare and contrast the dwell times along the Gulf Coast ports? And that turned out to be a pretty spectacular failure because it turns out all of those ports don't consistently report on their dwell time, and there's not a lot of publicly available information on dwell time, specifically in these Gulf area ports. So that was to me. So then I had to go back. Okay, what's the second scenario? And I built the scenario, and that worked. That worked really well. But sometimes I think if you're crawling internal data, you're probably going to have a higher level of success. Whereas if you're going out and trying to retrieve publicly available information, you may have a little bit more difficult time. But Kathy, it sounds like you understand prompt engineering. Have there been things that you've built where you found that your prompting could have been better? And I'll give you just a second to answer because I don't think we can turn people's microphone on. Any other questions while Kathy is thinking about that or thinking about responding? Oh, Lawrence. Hey, Lawrence. Another alumni. Not a question from my end. Great information and insight. Awesome stuff, Elise. MSCTL 25 doing great things. Oh, Kathy.
Thanks, Lawrence.
We've got some alumni and board members joining us today, which is fantastic. What do you think, Kathy? What's your experience on prompting? Have to. So Elise, I'll tell you what, if you stop the share,
Mhm. Yep.
I'll, I'm going to share my slides. I want to talk a little bit about Kathy. I was contracting at Amazon, and they had a great internal prompt guide. Just Kathy, I know I'm putting you on the spot and adding some dead air in here, but what was it about the prompt guide that you said it was great? Were there one, two, or three different things that it told you to remember and implement that you thought were particularly effective? And then Luke writes, while Kathy's thinking about that, Luke writes, how do you deal with context compression, i.e., models becoming overloaded by iterative use and breaking down, hallucinating, and psychosis?
I haven't had that, so maybe you can share.
Oh, yeah. Luke, what do you mean by that? Yeah, Johnny, your colleague. These things are getting much better at remembering what you've prompted in the past. And I know on ChatGPT, if you're writing these AI assistants or custom GPTs, they share across. So there's some cross learning there. There was an active Slack channel with highly responsive SMEs. Yeah. Models. So Luke points out that sometimes he comes across models that get biased quickly and then are unusable. So wow. Okay. So great interaction, great questions from everybody. Lawrence, thank you for telling. Elise, thank you for joining us today. Let me do this. Let me talk just a little bit about the program here at the UW. We, obviously, the University of Washington has a great reputation, not particularly easy to get into. Our focus is really giving people hands-on learning in the supply chain. I was asking my students, hey, how are all of the tariffs and the nearshoring and onshoring impacting your daily operations? And the answer was, we are getting a lot more requests for analyses from senior executives, right? They're doing all this scenario planning and they're asking us to come back and crunch the numbers and make some recommendations. And I think focusing on analytics is something that we've done a great job of in the last few years and something that we're continuing to work on and add. We do have an interdisciplinary curriculum. We're sort of half engineering, half business. I think the biggest benefit of this program, it's designed to be part-time. It's an online program. We don't make you just sit there and watch boring recorded presentations. We have a live session once a week for 2 hours a day where you get to talk to the people in your cohort and interact with the professor. So it feels a lot more like a live event, but you don't have to climb in your car, get through traffic, drive on campus, and get into a classroom. I think for us, I think the professors and everybody involved in the program, our number one objective is to help propel you through the leadership ranks, right? We really have been very intentional about the curriculum designed to kind of round you out and prepare you for more senior level leadership experiences. So some of the topics we talk about: AI and automation, analytics and visualization, optimization and modeling, finance and risk. It turns out that the risk management class, because one of the big issues in global supply chain right now is companies are trying to figure out how to de-risk their supply chains, right? They've got these plants from all over the world that rely on air transportation and ocean going containers, and there's a lot of risk and timing involved. So that class tends to be very useful, and people love that class. We talk about executive communication. You're going to get a lot of training in the program on how to prepare and deliver presentations. We talk about freight and logistics systems, obviously, and then forecasting. Some of the learning outcomes, we're doing more and more on predictive analytics, forecast planning and optimization. That's a topic that this year has come up more than probably any other, is just how there are new tools out there to help with forecasting, right? Because in the presentation that Fabio and Bill did, they talked about how companies historically rely on historical data to do forecasting, where now there's a whole bunch of other publicly available information, data sets, and tools to help you improve your forecasting so that you can get your right products into the right place at the right time for the right customers. Obviously, we're a logistics heavy organization. We talk about sustainability, how you balance cost and the environmental impact. In my class, we train you how to do net present value analyses, right? So it's one thing to have a good idea. It's another thing to flesh out that idea and be able to run the numbers and say, yeah, this may seem like it's going to cost us a lot of money, but we're going to make a lot of money in return. One of the great examples was a couple of years ago. We had a guy in the program who was involved in the train industry, and the big problem that they had was they would run these trains from Vancouver down through Seattle, and obviously once you cross that border, there's a whole different set of labor laws, logistics, compliance related stuff. Same in Canada. So Canada and the US, there may be similarities, but there's all these different rules. And the problem that they were having was sometimes these trains would get stuck at the border. The teams running the trains would time out. So they would have to wait, send the team away, wait till they recruited the next team to come in and pick up the train and drive it across, because they could only work a certain number of hours in a day and a certain number of hours in a week. And so his solution to that problem was, let's hire two additional teams to be able to respond to these situations where the train comes to a stop. And he said, in the old world, he would have gone in and his boss would have just yelled at him and said, "Hey, we're hiring you to streamline our costs, not to add to our costs." But he had run the numbers, and for an extra, it was like going to be 650, maybe $700,000 a year in additional labor costs because of the fines that they were going to save on their service level agreements, because of the delivery times being far more streamlined. They made millions of dollars on that roughly $700,000 a year investment in additional people. And when we asked him the question, you're like, well, what was the big difference? He said, in the past, I would have just gone in and said, "Hey, I've got a great idea," and I would have just been tossed out on my ear. And that kind of goes back to the strategic thinking and decision making. We really try to reinforce data-driven decision making. And again, some of that comes down to executive level communication, because let's face it, that's important. These executives sit and listen to presentations all the time. They're typically in these meetings looking for sharp people. You come in and nail a presentation. You've got your numbers all set. You're responsive to the questions. Trust me, there are going to be people in that room that walk out and go, "Hey, that Elise person is sharp. We need to find out what else she can do with that organization." So with that, I will stop. Let's see. We've got some additional questions. Hi, Luke. For sure. Hi, Luke. This can happen with ChatGPT. So Luke had said that he finds that some of the models he's worked with get biased pretty quickly. Arsalan, who's our teaching assistant and a PhD candidate, said, "Hi, Luke. This can happen with ChatGPT. What I usually do is create a folder, save the previous chat there, then start a new chat and ask it to review our earlier conversation and continue on from that point." Karen Livingston, it was definitely a valuable program for me. Definitely, Dan, this project-based capstone was a good model for projects at my org. Thank you, Karen, for saying that. Yeah, we had um, an alumni a few years ago. I was having lunch with him and he looked at me and the practicum, right? Having to do a presentation to our board of advisors who are all very senior level people, right? And if you've never done a presentation to somebody at the VP level or the C-suite level, it's just a totally different environment. These are people that have seen hundreds, they've come across hundreds of these ideas, watched hundreds of these presentations. And what this alumni, Dustin, said was, "I wish I had taken that particular class 15 years ago, because it would have had a major difference on my career." So as we head into the last 15, Kathy writes, "As we head into the last 15 minutes, do you have any recommendations for further self-study regarding LinkedIn or local groups? I follow GreekWire and they sometimes publish AI events. Thanks, Elise and Dan, for an engaging talk." You know what, Kathy, do this here. I'm going to put in there's certain people that I follow on YouTube that I think do a great job. There's one video in particular that I think people should watch when it comes to prompting. Because Kathy, you asked the question about prompting. The young guy who does it, he's kind of obnoxious and he's almost a little bit insulting, but it's the best. And it's now a year and a half old, maybe 2 years old. It's absolutely the best video on how to engineer your prompt that I've ever seen. So I just put my email there on the screen. Feel free, anybody, to shoot me an email. This week's a little bit zany for me, so it may take me a little bit to get back. But if anybody doesn't have, wait, one quick thank you to Katie Ward, our producer extraordinaire. These things are very time consuming. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes in. So Katie, thank you very much for doing that. And Elise, our all-star alumni of the month, the week, whatever it is, thank you. These were really interesting. And I was telling people at the meeting last night, I mean, these are use cases where you don't have to be in supply chain. These are things that even if you're in the legal organization, you can do it to help research some of the contracts. So contract terms and warranties and things like that. So With that, gang, I hope you'll consider joining our program. We've got a number of alumni on here, which is just great. I love keeping in touch and following people's careers because I think you know, we really do equip you to take the next steps. It's not going to happen overnight, but as you progress in your career, you start to get 5 years out, you'll see people's earning potentials, new titles, recruiters reaching out to try to pull them into their organization. It really is a great program. So I hope you'll consider that. And with that, have a great week and happy Valentine's Day coming up here in just a few days. So, anyways, thanks again, Elise. Thanks, Katie. Thank everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Take care, gang.